Hello, and we're back already. Oh, that noise. Hey, all right, we've got the smoke going on from the background. And now I'm delighted to introduce our next guest. She's been working in the industry in loads of different areas, going from game reviewer to game designer, story writer. She's been writing for, loads. Look her up, you'll probably know anyway. Various comics, and also she's going to be writing a fantasy. Well, she has written a fighting fantasy book. It's all done. It's all written. I hope it has. Anyway, here we are. Rhianna Pratchett. Hello. How are you?
Hello. I'm good. Although you seem to be on fire.
Yes, I know. We have.
Coming out the back of your head.
There is a very small dragon that lives in the back of the cave, and occasionally he likes to come out and say hello. But I think he'll be all right today. He's also quite shy. So, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Thank you for joining the International Gamebook Day. This obviously you are now part of the fold for the Gamebook.
I'm in the family.
Yeah, but that's obviously not how you started. And tell us your kind of fascination with fantasy, how you kind of got into sort of writing and games. Your kind of brief potted history of Rhianna Pratchett.
It goes back a long way until I was 6 years old, basically, and my dad brought the first computer into the house, which was a Sinclair ZX81, which was a very kind of black and white boxy machine, and he had the game Mazogs on it, which is a pixelated kind of maze game.
Yeah.
And it's a little pixelated man going through a maze like this, and he was chased by little pixelated crabby creatures. And Dad said I was quite scared by it to start with, and I realised that you could get a little pixelated sword and fight back against little pixelated crabby creatures, and that sort of sense of fairness, I think, just struck something in me, and that was the moment I became a gamer. And I used to get my dad to hand me down machines. I used to play games with him. I used to sit next to him and get out the graph paper and draw the maps for the games, or I would tuck myself behind him in his big chair and sort of poke out like a co-pilot of like navigating him through the game and things, and we sort of made gaming into a spectator sport. I used to play games with the little girl next door, adventure games, like King's Quest, Monkey Island and things like that. I was about 8 and 11. And so I've been doing it for a very long time. I trained as a journalist in London, and then I went into first freelance for doing games for a women's magazine of all places, a women's magazine called Minx that was aimed at 18 to 24-year-old women, and it for a short time, for about 4 months, it covered games, and I covered games for them, and that got me onto press lists and things. I eventually got a job at PC Zone magazine, which was the UK's longest running PC games magazine. And then from there, I spent a couple of years going all around the world, talking to developers and seeing how games are made and sort of put together, and the evolution of a game. And from then on, I eventually went into development myself and started working on the narrative of games and building up my career from that. From writing games, I started writing comics. I now adapt for film and TV. I do a few short stories. And I've written a fighting fantasy book.
Wow, that's fantastic. Now, obviously, writing for a game, the narrative for that, a computer game, is it similar to writing fighting fantasy? Are they kind of? I've obviously never written a computer game or the narrative for it. How is that done? And was it easy to transfer the two skills?
There was more in common than you'd think, but actually it was on the design side of games. So although I work on the writing and the narrative design of games, I picked up a lot about general games design. And so that really helped when working on the Fighting Fantasy book, especially when it came to things like structuring boss fights and things like that. Kind of levels and areas and world building and things like that, because Crystal of Storms has quite sort of defined areas, so a little bit like levels in a game, and I specifically designed it that way because that's something I felt kind of comfortable with. I wanted to give every little island its own kind of personality and to fit it into the kind of economy of Pangaria, which is a floating archipelago. And so the game design the game design I picked up came in very useful. You have to kind of write quite in with a lot of brevity in both games and in fighting fantasy books.
Yeah.
You get more words to play with in prose, of course, but in games you're usually having to write quite quickly and turn a scene very quickly as well. So there was more commonalities in both those mediums than I initially thought going in, and it was only when I was wading around in the structure of fighting fantasy book that I realised that a lot of what I'd learned in games was helpful.
Were there any particular fighting fantasy books that you read? Have you read them all, or did you pick a certain? I don't think anyone has.
I read a lot as a kid.
Yeah.
And I remember particularly Death Trap Dungeon because I got into trouble with my local library because I hadn't brought it back, and they sent me a we're going to take you to court, 8-year-old child, because you haven't returned Death Trap Dungeon. And so that's my abiding memory of fighting fantasy during a kid was being persecuted by my local library. And I sort of refreshed myself a bit before I started the book, so I read Charlie's Gates of Death as well, and that gave me a little sort of kernel of inspiration for the Crystal of Storms, actually, because he has a little a kind of short scene involving goblins and a floating beer in that, and that kind of gave me the idea for technomancy and the floating islands of Pangaria.
Yes. Oh wow. And obviously Death Trap Dungeon you were keen on, and were there any other game book series that you dipped into?
I think I probably played some of the Choose Your Own Adventure ones.
Yeah.
The ones that had the white line, the white covers that.
Oh yes, yeah.
Choose Your, like You Are a Shark and things like that. It was kind of a long time ago, but I think I remember the covers of the fighting fantasy books.
Yeah,
a lot.
Yeah, they were striking at that age as well. It kind of grabs you. I think if you make the artwork really that gory for an 8-year-old, you're going to be marked by it for the rest of your life, which I think.
I mean, it was quite an 80s style, and if you look at a lot of fantasy books during that era, they have that sort of quite detailed style to them. But it has changed quite a lot over the years.
Did you have any of those kind of books in the house? And was your father, obviously you haven't mentioned your father, but your father was Terry Pratchett, and now you're part of sort of looking after his estate and any film adaptations, anything that comes from that. But did he like those books as well? Did he get into those world?
I don't think he ever read a fighting fantasy book, but obviously, he wrote fantasy books, and I used to go to SF and fantasy conventions sort of every year from the age of 8 to 16, so it was very much, I'm very comfortable with fantasy as a genre and all the different subgenres within fantasy. It's sort of it's just always been part of my life. It's like water is to a fish, like it's very comfortable. It's just always been there. And so Dad never played, or at least not with me, like tabletop role-playing games or D&D or anything like that. And he was very into computers. So computers and electronics, so that's what he got me into, because I was an only child, so I was obviously interested in what my dad did. And he when I was a kid, he had very much a big brother type of vibe, more than a dad. So he was, playing games or giving me the machines. But as I say, we were playing games together, and I was drawing the maps. So I never got into the tabletop DMing side of things. It was computer games.
I've got a question here from Stuart Wallance saying, do you think there would be a chance of, or an interest of doing a choose your own adventure book, or fighting fantasy book in your father's world, this world, or would he?
I don't know. That's quite a bit. That would be quite a big thing. I mean, it's possible, but the style of my father's writing and work is quite different from fighting fantasy. Yeah. So it's like when I wrote the fighting fantasy book, like I had, Ian and Steve told me, that I had to sort of adhere to the style, and it's quite straight fantasy. It's not particularly kind of jokey. Yeah. In the way that my father my father's work was, although it was a lot deeper than just being jokey, and that sort of just saying it was jokey is doing it a bit of a disservice. But it had a lot of humour inherent in it.
Yes.
And it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was kind of straight Tolkien-esque fantasy, but fighting fantasy is more like, it's more Tolkien-esque, it's more D&D, it's more traditional fantasy, I guess, whereas my father's isn't. So it would be its own thing.
Yeah.
I think, and you'd have to be quite kind of careful.
And you'd probably kind of want to have him there to write it as well, wouldn't you? It wouldn't be the same.
I think. Yeah. And we have Narrativia, which is the company that I co-run, which deals with the multimedia rights of my dad's work. So we are developing projects based on my dad's work. We do also produce various books, the short stories, for example, but we're not looking to create new books.
No.
And that was sort of something I said very early on, that no one's going to be writing for Discworld books.
Exactly. That's
there
good.
might be special editions, that kind of thing. You've got diaries, you've got calendars, and you'll have the new projects when they come out.
That's good to hear. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about the Crystal Storms, about more detail of the plot and what makes it different to other game books? Or
yeah, sure. So I think you can now read the first page or the introduction online now. So I know Scholastic have been posting that. So if you go to my Twitter feed, you'll see I've retweeted it, and you can sort of read the first little extract of it. So it takes place in Pangaria. Pangaria is a floating archipelago of islands. It's 5 islands around a 6th central island, and the archipelago exists inside a giant tempest, which is the biggest tempest on the Sea of Tempests. And Sea of Tempests is between the 2 major continents in the fighting fantasy world. And you are a member of the Skywatch. The Skywatch are pretty much like Pangaria's police force, but because Pangaria is largely very peaceful, there's not a lot to do as being a member of the Skywatch. And you get to see the other islands, but it's largely hedge disputes or lost cats or things like that. And you're yearning for a bit of adventure. And one day, all the Skywatch are called to a meeting at Nimbus, and Nimbus is the central island, the kind of power hub of Pangaria. And you're all kind of set to go there, and your commander tells you, could you just go back to the watch house and pick up my flyers? And flyers are like portable wings, very sort of Da Vinci style wings that senior members of the Skywatch are allowed, and they will allow you to fly for a limited period of time. They're powered by storm crystals, which are gathered from the tempests around the Sea of Tempests by these creatures called Stormborns. And the storm crystals power everything that flies and or floats in Pangaria, along with goblin technology. So it's a sort of a fusion of magic and technology. So you're very excited about going to this meeting. You've not been to the Nimbus much before. You have to go back, get the flyers. You come back, you step on the island. There's an enormous explosion of energy. You're thrown off the island. You're falling through the air. You manage to get these wings on and steady yourself, only to see the Nimbus basically drop out of the sky, down into the ocean below, and get lost in the storms. And now you realise that you're the only member of the Skywatch, or at least you think you're the only member of the Skywatch left in Pangaria, and you take upon yourself to investigate what happened to Nimbus.
Wow.
And try and uncover the mystery, what happened, who caused it to happen, and how you can get down there. So that you explore the other 5 islands, trying to piece together the mystery, and then ultimately trying to get down to the Nimbus, where you get a bathysphere, and you get to sort of explore the area around the Nimbus and the sunken citadel as well in the bathysphere. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
That sounds like it's potentially more than one book, Rhianna. Have you thought about doing a few, or have you given that option? Or
I don't know. Like Ian and Stephen, I've not talked about it. I imagine it would probably be down to like how well it actually did.
Yeah.
But I was inspired partly by a little scene in Charlie's book, which had goblins flying a beer. It's only in one scene, and I kind of thought, I wonder what would happen if that technology, or technomancy as I call it, which is half magic, half technology, or if you went bigger with that. And at the same time, I'd seen a news story about cloud formations above China forming what looked like a city in the sky. It actually looked like skyscrapers. No one knows whether it's a faked image.
I think I remember seeing that.
Yeah, a weird weather condition. So I had goblins in my head and floating islands, and then I sort of merged them and then made this archipelago. And I like the idea of giving each island its personality and things like that. So you get to explore every island. You can do it in a variety of orders, and you get to choose one of 3 home islands. And your home island, you will be met by a friend who will accompany you on that island. And if it's not your home island, things will be a little bit different. But it's all about it's a little bit like a fantasy procedural, police procedural, really.
And what about the creatures? Were there things that you could create yourself, or did you go to like out of the pit and sort of go through?
Out of the pit was useful. I sort of did a mixture of my own creatures and out of the pit, and I sort of delved into the depths of fighting fantasy and got back. I think it's the Wheelies. Is it Wheelies or Wheelers?
Wheelers. From
Wheelers, yeah.
Return to Oz.
There's
oh no, the round thing. Yes, of course. Yeah,
yes,
I know. Yeah.
I don't know why I'm mixing up with it. There's because in Return to Oz they've got wheels.
Their little wheel. That's another.
Wheelies and fighting fantasy, they're sort of disc type.
That's right, with little hands on the end, like doing cartwheels.
Little hands and knives and things like that.
Yeah.
So that was one I used. Sharpkin was one I used from Outer Pit, and I also kind of created my own. So the creature on the front of the book is a Canador, and Canadors are pretty much like flying sheepdogs, but instead of herding sheep, they herd clouds. So they predominantly exist on and around Altus, and Altus is the water island. So Altus is where clouds are basically farmed and fattened up with rain. And every time another island needs water, they contact Altus. A cloudkin is sent over, squeezes all the water out, comes back to Altus, and kind of is fattened up again.
Yeah.
And the cloudkin farmers on Altus are helped by Canadors, and Canadors are flying sheepdogs, and they herd the clouds. So that's the creature on the front is a flying sheepdog, and Canadors are fairly kind of neutral to friendly, but because of this elemental energy that you find out it's elemental energy that's caused the explosion in Nimbus. A lot of the islands have been corrupted in various ways. So on the flying island, on the farming island, you'll find that the local vegetation has been corrupted and is attacking farmers and things like that. In Altus, you'll find that some of the cloudkins have gone rogue and turned into stormkins, which are big sort of semi-sentient, aggressive clouds. All sorts of things. The elemental energy is having a lot of effect on some of the population and the creatures on Pangaria. So
fantastic.
There's a lot of stuff that you have to sort out.
You have it. So how did it come about? Did you were you approached by Ian and Steve, or the publishers, or did you approach them, or have you known?
I was approached by Ian. I've known Ian for many years, and when I was working on the Tomb Raider reboot in 2013, Ian and I did some PR stuff together, kind of like a old Lara's dad and new Lara's mum kind of thing. And we both, obviously Ian's been in the industry a lot longer than I have, but we've both been around for many years. So Ian approached me directly about this, and it was a wonderful opportunity and slightly scary, and I like the slightly scary opportunities. That's if I'm I'm slightly worried and I'm not completely sure if I can do it, I think that's the one I've got to go for.
Yeah. So, I mean, how long did it take you to write from the sort of the planning to the actual end draft?
It's difficult to tell because since lockdown, like timers have no meaning anymore. Like I can't tell when things were or how long they took. I think it was about 6 months from.
Oh wow.
But that includes like pitching the story and things like that. So the actual writing was probably over a couple of months.
Wow.
I did it in chunks. And I had John Green, who you know, as my fighting fantasy editor. So he was really helping me with the fighting fantasy bits and pieces, making sure that I use the right terminology. Some things are in uppercase, other things aren't. How to kind of structure a boss fight and things like that. And that was incredibly useful. And I wrote the story in sections, and I sort of wrote each island at a time, and that meant that we were editing on the fly, which was very helpful. But yeah, I think the actual writing was a couple of months, but the kind of whole process, because I wrote out quite about 6 or 7 page treatment, just going over the story and the different things that you would encounter on the island as well.
And did you have a massive map on the wall of all the different? Because I know when Ian and Steve do it, they grid it out.
They're old school, and I know Ian does it freehand. And I tried that a bit, but my handwriting is so awful that it just wasn't going to be of use. So like I as soon as I written it, I couldn't really read my own handwriting. So I tried multiple things, and I probably got a hybrid of a lot of different things. I tried flowcharts. Just kind of doing them in Word, and they were useful, but they took so long to do that in the end I thought I had an Excel document with different colours for the different islands, and I mapped out how many sections I had to do, and I just basically coloured in the sections as I was going, and just sort of kept track of everything on the fly. And I did some I think I did like basic by hand overviews of the islands, and then kind of moved into Excel. I think if I was redoing it, I'd probably maybe give myself more time and start with the flowcharts. They took too much time by the time I got around to them, but they were actually quite useful because I could kind of connect the dots. Or maybe look at something like Twine, which I hadn't really used much in the past, but I think that probably would have been quite useful for it. So there's a lot of learning on the fly, really.
Is there a project you'd like to be working on next? Is there something, sort of a dream job that you kind of go, oh, I'd love to?
Oh, I don't know, because I tend to pull back from talking about dream jobs, because I used to sort of say that working on a Thief game was a dream job, but then I worked on a Thief game and it turned out as a nightmare. So I've sort of stopped doing that. I really look for the new challenges and where I can sort of stretch myself as a creative. So that's one of the reasons I took on the Fighting Fantasy project, because I was, as I said, a little bit scared of it. I didn't know if I could do it, and I thought, that's what I want to be doing. And I work in various mediums. I adapt for film and TV, predominantly book to screen adaptations, but some more kind of original stuff, and I do comics and I do short stories and things like that. So it's sort of just looking for the next challenge. I'm looking for more books to adapt as well. I'm working with Motive Pictures and Endeavour Content at the moment with Narrativia on adaptations of my father's work. And so I have a big project that I'm writing with them, and that's been a lot of fun, and that sort of kept me occupied through lockdown. And I have a game that is actually coming out today called Surgeon Simulator 2.
Fantastic.
Which has a bit of a bonkers story, and it was a lockdown labour of love story. So it went from being no story in the game to creating the story, writing the story, casting it, and recording the voice actors in 4 months during lockdown.
Wow.
So we actually got a story mode into the game, which has never really had any concrete story before. So that's actually being released.
So, sorry, tell us more about what is it? What do you have to do?
Surgeon Simulator, the original Surgeon Simulator, it was basically a virtual surgery game, and it was kind of quite surreal. It didn't really have a story. It wasn't quite clear whether you were playing through the hallucinations of the main character as he sort of hallucinated his way through surgery. Surgeon Simulator 2 is a multiplayer game where you're trying to do surgery, this kind of mad cat surgery where you're basically ripping off your patient's arms or scoring them off, and trying to, like, pulling heads off and things like that. It's very,
oh my God,
it's very silly and crazy. And
is it set in modern day, or is it a fantasy game, or?
It's not. No, it's not set in modern day. I think it's sort of set around the 50s. But it's set in its own kind of semi-sentient building called Labs, and there is a story mode where you meet some of the characters that built Labs and built the Surgeon Simulator training program. So the Surgeon Simulator training program is basically sets out to turn anyone into a surgeon.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter whether you have any medical training. It's just going to turn you. You go in one end and you come out the other end as a surgeon.
Yeah.
And it is mad cat, and it has a story mode as well, and that was really fun to do. And I got to, like, write a lot of prop descriptions, which have been very influenced by going slightly mad in lockdown. And it is just kind of silly and fun, and the story reflects that. And I really like doing that sort of stuff in games because there aren't much opportunities for kind of comedy and humour in games. So I really like doing them.
I can imagine. Oh, I'd love to play like a fantasy medieval version with different monsters that you're splicing together and cutting.
Yeah, that's good. Like a kind of Dr. Frankenstein-esque.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the next one. Never know. That's amazing. So hopefully your book will go terribly well, and the game will as well. We can see you doing maybe another one. Someone said it sounds like a 4-book series, like Sorcery. Your Crystal of Storms. So you've got so many lovely ideas in there. Ian, if you're listening, that's a great idea. So let's start working on that. Sorry, that's probably Steve Jackson, probably more for that one. But if anyone wants to sort of follow you, if they want to sort of look at the book, obviously the book is going to be all over the place, and if they're on this, they'll probably know where it is anyway. When does that get released, the Crystal of Storms?
1st of October.
1st October, okay, not too long. I think you can you pre-order it yet on Amazon?
Yes, you can. Amazon, Waterstones, at your local bookshop.
That's amazing. And the game, where can we get that? Is that on?
So Surgeon Simulator, it's on the Epic Store at the moment, and I think it's actually getting released today, this afternoon. Like a lot of people have pre-access to it, so you'll find it on the Epic Store, and I think it will be coming to other places as well.
Fantastic.
So if you go and follow Bossa Studios, they're the creators behind it, and yeah, there's lots of mad cat fun.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Rhianna. You've been amazing. Really appreciate your time, and welcome to the world of fighting fantasy. And we'll embrace you into the fold, and hopefully we'll see more from you in the years to come. Thank you so much for your time.
Right.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye. That's great. Well, thank you very much, Rhianna. Amazing. That's fun. So go and check those out. We've got a few other things coming up. Next we've got Dave, but that's at 2:00. And I'm just going to run you a little ad as well for another game that at the moment is having 50% off. You might have all heard of it. It's Rhianna's favourite. It's one of my favourites. Probably your favourite as well. It's Death Trap Dungeon. Okay.
Welcome to Death Trap Dungeon.
You will attempt what has become known as the Walk. Dice will be rolled to determine your skill, stamina, and luck scores.
Take a breath and jump deep in. If your trial you hope to win.
Death Trap Dungeon.